The Beijing Winter Games have begun despite the diplomatic hurdles posed by boycotts by several Western leaders. For more on this reality and the repercussions, I have Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. It's good to have you back, Professor Kim.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Chung Koo-yeon from Gangwon National University. It's a pleasure to have you here, Professor Chung.
Thank you for having me here.
Right, Professor Kim, let's begin then with a few words on the importance of sports in promoting diplomacy.
Sports events has been very important roles historically in dealing with the one country's diplomatic or political interests. Maybe some governments, especially, the example might be ping pong diplomacy in 1971 by President Nixon of the United States. The U.S. tried to use the ping pong sports as an important tool to normalize its relationship with China. But sports events itself can be also a very important critical juncture. The event, I think, example is 2008 Beijing Olympic, after which the rise of China became very much evident compared to the Western countries and United States, which have devastated its economy after the financial crisis. So I'm not sure what this Beijing Olympic will have a role, but I think China will try to use this event as a tool to upgrade its reputation globally, I think, rather than using it for some purposes diplomatically.
Right. And keeping in mind what Professor Kim has said, then Professor Chung, do you believe that China looks to gain diplomatic from its latest hosting of this global sporting event?
Well, for the last 2 years, it has not been that great for China because of the COVID-19 pandemics, as well as confrontation of wolf warrior diplomacy, which tainted Chinese, national image as well as reputation. So this event was pretty critical for Xi Jinping to upgrade his image as well as to be welcomed as international stakeholders. But as you can, and also domestically, this event was pretty important because Xi Jinping is starting his third term this fall, which consolidates power as an independent ruler, whose power has been pretty less centralized since the reign of Mao Zedong. So this was pretty critical domestically and internationally. But as you mentioned about diplomatic boycott, the number of national leaders who actually joined this event was kind of less than expected. So in that sense, China has not been fully accomplished its goal, especially diplomatic goal. But what remains is how they actually carry out the rest of the games and how they treat foreigners in the territory of China.
Right. And now for a glimpse of the general atmosphere in the mainland as Beijing plays host to the Winter Games amid a pandemic and a diplomatic boycott led by the Biden administration, I turn to Fabian Kretschmer, who is currently over in China. Fabian, welcome back.
Hello from Beijing.
Right, Fabian, what are the implications of hosting the Winter Games for Beijing as compared to its earlier hosting of the Summer Games back in 2008 that Professor Kim also mentioned?
Yeah, I think the significance is that now Beijing is the first host to the first city to host both a Summer Olympic and now a Winter Olympic. That's quite an achievement. And if you ask people on the street, then they are really proud of it and feel some patriotic pride. But that being said, compared to the 2008 Olympics, at that time there was a big Olympic fever. People were really excited, and also the population and the government was much more open to the world, I would say. Now there's not really much to feel from that. I mean, people are not so emotionally moved by the Winter Olympics. Of course, also because China is not a traditional winter sport land, but also because because of the pandemic, the Winter Games take place behind a loop, basically behind fences. So it's really separate from the population. So even here from Beijing, it feels a little bit far away.
Right. And Fabian, what appears to be the general public view, perhaps, with regard to the absence of diplomatic delegations from the US, the UK, and other Western countries to the Winter Games?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, because it's not really, as you might expect, that it's a big topic, this diplomatic boycott here within the mainland, because most of the state-controlled media, I mean, they do cover it very much on the side. They don't really mention it that much. And if so, then they dismiss it as a political grandstanding, as a kind of politicization of a sports. And it's not really that much discussed. I mean, that's a stark contrast. For example, if you look at Western media, especially US media, they are full of basically political stories. You don't even get the impression that it's a sport event, but they only talk about the diplomatic boycott. So it's really two different worlds.
Right. And back here in the studio, Professor Kim, simply speaking, what have been the ripple effects of the Biden administration's diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Games?
I don't think it was really successful. Maybe compared to the United States, for example, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the U.S. position, hegemonic position now is pretty much less than that. Maybe I think 10 or 15 countries, only 10 or 15 countries participated in the Beijing Olympic boycott. So I think maybe the U.S. hegemonic capability has been lessened. The Chinese economic influence on other countries and international community has been pretty much widespread. So trying to use this Olympic and boycotting this Olympic by the United States, I don't think was really successful.
Right. And Professor Zhang, do you see the latest diplomatic developments amid the Winter Games as perhaps ushering in a fresh chapter of geopolitical tensions with China and Russia perhaps on one side and the US and its allies on the other?
Yes, actually, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping held a summit ahead of Olympic Games, and they produced a joint statements, which was pretty interesting, that China criticized the United States as a representative minority in the world community, and Russia also criticized the United States for not encouraging European countries to join NATO. So they are showing this alignment, strategic alignment between two countries, and they are confronting the United States hegemony, as Professor Kim mentions, is declining hegemony. So afterwards, well, this Olympic was not that critical, but after this Olympic Games, now they are facing more confrontation, great power politics, and U.S. need to garner more support from their allies and partners.
Right. And meanwhile, Fabienne, yet another challenge the current Games over in Beijing is the spread of Omicron. Having said that, what is the latest on that front, Fabienne?
Well, even before the Games started, they detected 300 cases, not only among the people who arrived from the airport, but also from the people who were already inside the bubble. And that includes, of course, some journalists, some team coaches, but also athletes themselves. However, I would still argue that the bubble works so far. I've seen the safety concept with my own eyes. It is really strict. There's a daily nucleic testing. The staff mostly wears like hazmat suits or protective gear. The movement is quite restricted, and all the venues are really walled off. I mean, there are fences, there are security cameras and personnel that prevent the athletes and everyone inside the bubble really to have contact with the rest of the population. So from an epidemiological point of view, I think it is quite strict, and it has prevented a big infection cluster of the virus from spreading so far.
Right, that is reassuring to know. Fabienne, has there been any efforts to perhaps address quite a bit of talk about the quality of food at the Olympics, as well as perhaps the wind chill factor, is it, that the athletes from Europe were not really expecting?
The quality of the food?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I've seen the menu, so the cards of the people, what they order. I mean, it's quite disappointing because Beijing is a great food city. You have the best restaurants here, and really, I mean, the Chinese cuisine is quite diverse. But what you can get inside the bubble has been very underwhelming, to say the least. And I mean, also, it sounds trivial, but even for a small can of Chinese local beer that is for 8 kwai, so maybe I don't know, Chon Obek one in Korean currency, you pay 10 times as much in the bubble. So I heard a lot of complaints about that. Right.
Fabia, one final question before you leave us. What can you share with us now about the protocols in place with regard to media coverage of the Games there?
Well, I mean, there have been a lot of issues. I mean, just during the ceremony for foreign reporters who put their tripod on the street and did some live shots or asked some people, they were prevented from security personnel. And because it happens during the Olympics, it gets a lot of attention, but that's our daily business here. I mean, if you look foreign, if you have a camera and go to the street and ask people, it will not take more than 10 minutes until you have some kind of unwanted attention. So yeah, it's quite sad.
Right, I see. All right, Fabienne, thank you very much for the latest on the Winter Games over in China.
Thank you.
Right. Back here in the studio then, Professor Chung, what looks to be the impact of tensions between China and the US perhaps on matters here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, as I mentioned, the great power politics between U.S. on one side and the other side in Russia and China. Now, U.S. has less time to focus on South Korea and Korean Peninsula issue. And also, as you mentioned, the Ukraine crisis is coming up, and it's kind of a matter of time, and it's not a matter of how. So, United States now need to focus more on, European theater at the same time, this Indo-Pacific theater. So, United States have less more kind of priority and less more assets to focus on this Indo-Pacific, especially on the Korean Peninsula issue.
Right, and Professor Kim, I extend the same question to you. Staying on the Korean Peninsula, what are your prospects with regard to matters here in the country, on the peninsula that is, after the Winter Games?
I think this is, we have to take a look at from a broader perspective. I think after, Trump's gone, Biden came in, and, I don't think North Korea is ready to jump into the working level talk with Biden. Working level talk, very long, tedious, and burdensome process for North Korea. I don't think North Korea can accept all these kinds of working level talk with the United States. Maybe that's why I think North Korea requested some preconditions from the United States, but it didn't work. So maybe I think after North Korea's request was not accepted by the Biden government, North Korea is continuing developing its defense capabilities. So I think this is something that would continue in the future. But more important thing is that the U.S.-China rivalry is getting fierce, and North Korea is leaning towards China rather than leaning towards the United States, which means that I think recently we'll have a trilateral meeting with Japan and the United States and Hawaii, which I think the U.S. is trying to bolster trilateral, mechanism in the current, set of the Korean Peninsula situations. So it will be pretty much, like China camp and U.S. camp rivalry. I think will be something that will happen more in the future.
Do you also foresee then future or furthermore test launches of missiles by North Korea as it seeks to secure leverages it?
I think so. I think so. Now North Korea continues to, testify its, missiles, and I think in April, after the new government came in, South Korea and the, maybe possibly the joint military exercises will happen. I think, possibly North Korea can shoot the ICBMs, and also even that case, I think China will still be on the side of North Korea.
Right. And against this climate of affairs, Professor Chung, in what direction do you believe should Korea seek to plot its diplomatic course, should I say? I understand this is a difficult question, though.
Well, it's very difficult questions, but I think South Korea confront two difficult challenges. And the first one is the North Korea and maintain stability of Korean Peninsula in the first place. This government, Moon administration, has been focused on maintaining stability and further initiate this peace initiative during his term, but it was not that successful. Still, North Korea is developing nuclear weapons and testing missiles. So it's pretty important to prioritize maintaining stability on the Korean Peninsula in the first place. The second challenge is the Indo-Pacific and great power politics. We are located in the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time we are in the Indo-Pacific theater. So given that great power politics are kind of intensifies, that this Korean Peninsula issue will be located within this power politics issue. So we need to figure out how we can navigate this power politics and conflict at the same time increasing our strategic value of our country.
Right. And staying with that, Professor Chung, do you believe that Korea or the Moon administration so far has been navigating the waters or balancing tensions between Beijing and Washington in a productive manner?
Well, it's pretty tough, choices and tough strategies. And this great power politics has been in the making during the last 4 years. And now we are seeing actual this politics in different camps, Russia and China, United States and its allies. So we have to be find our own visions and what kind of country South Korea wants to be for the last long-term great power politics. Also at the same time, how we can deal with North Korea issue, maintain stability. So that's kind of difficult questions. And and we have elections. And so after 30 days, we might have different administrations, so we might have to chart another national strategy.
Right. And Professor Kim, do you see Seoul's decision perhaps to send or dispatch a diplomatic delegation to the Beijing Winter Games as perhaps affecting its future ties with Washington?
I don't really think so. Only that one event would not determine the relationship with the United States. You know, things has been pretty much happen long time. I mean, the South Korea has been very much hesitant between U.S. and China for a long time, not very active in the Indo-Pacific of the United States for a long time. So I don't think this Winter Game, Beijing Olympic thing only would determine U.S. perception about South Korea. More important thing we have to do for now is we have to think about what our relationship with China would be in the future. Let's assume the U.S. is not here. Let's assume that there's no U.S.-South Korea alliance. What will be the relationship between China and South Korea? I mean, we have to look at what happened in the history. I mean, there was no autonomy from China historically. So are we going to have the same posture toward China in the future, even though there's no United States here in the Korean Peninsula? I don't think we'll accept that if we don't hold the autonomy from China. We need to have a strategic autonomy from China. That's something we have to think about. You know, whether it's rather than it should be U.S. or China, some kind of a choice-driven foreign policy. I think a more important fundamental question is what is going to be our relationship with China in the future.
Right, and staying with our relationship with China, Professor Zhang, there's been quite a bit of heated accusations here in South Korea of cultural appropriation by China after a performer wearing hanbok appeared during the opening ceremony of the Winter Games. How do you respond?
Well, the scene we have actually watched through the parade was that there are 55 ethnic minorities and they are kind of respected. Chinese governments are trying to show that it respect and cherish the cultural heritage of these 55 ethnic minorities. So in that context, we cannot, easily accuse or criticize Chinese motivation. But in the long term, I think more fundamental way, we have to look at what China wants to achieve from Chinese this cultural processes. And this is not just one event. We have watched a number of events in the past, and it has been pretty long time we have watched this press. So we have to ask how far we have been prepared in the first place, and what Chinese actually wants from this cultural process. That's the kind of question we have to ask. And for that ends, I think what we have to do is look at our kind of, like, for instance, like academia. We have to work on our Korean studies. Also, public diplomacy effort should be more strengthened to let a world or community knows about our cultural heritage and our soft power.
Right, and Professor Kim, I address the same question to you. What are your thoughts on allegations here in the country with regard to cultural appropriation by neighboring China?
Well, this is something that is related to what I have mentioned before. I mean, China is rising. China is becoming a big power, bigger power than before. And I think definitely China will take a look at South Korea, the Korean Peninsula per se, as the one that has been before. I mean, we have been the country that has been providing tribute to Chinese, dynasties all the time. So these kinds of, strategic dependency on China, maybe economically, culturally, maybe many aspects will happen. So this is something that we have to be ready. I mean, if there is some kind of request by China that is inappropriate, are we ready to revert back to Chinese request? I mean, sometimes we are afraid of Chinese, economic coercion. So if that will be the case, then we have to be ready for the economic coercion. We have to diversify our markets and diplomacy so that we can hold up our strategic autonomy from China. So that's long-term game, but I think we have to be ready for it.
Right, and hopefully the new administration will work to do so. All right, Professor Kim, as always, thank you very much for your insights. Professor Chung, thank you very much for being with us here today.